Lights, camera, action.
Hey guys,
Hey everyone.
welcome back to the podcast. We hope you all had a very Merry Christmas. We are in that week in between Christmas and New Year's. Unfortunately, we do not have a New Year's movie. I honestly don't know if there are a whole lot of them, to tell you the truth.
I don't know. I'm sure there's some.
There probably are, surely. As many...
High School Musical.
Oh, definitely not. But anyways, we're excited to have you back with us again this week. This week, we're going to be covering another one of our personal favorites, Casino Royale, a 007 movie. What? Why are you giving me a look?
Say the name of the movie again.
Casino Royale.
There you go.
I was just putting a little pizzazz on the enunciation.
All right.
Anyways, so yes, we're going to be covering the very first Daniel Craig 007 movie, which we're super excited about. If you have not watched it before and you want to watch it before listening to this episode, it is currently streaming on Amazon Prime. So you can pause this, go watch it, and then come right back. But anyways, let's dive right in.
All right. So Casino Royale was released on November 17th of 2006. It was directed by Martin Campbell. It is starring...
Say that again?
Did I say something wrong?
No, you got me on Royale, which I was joking about. I think it's Martin Campbell.
Oh, okay. I was just thinking of like Campbell soup. Or maybe that's pronounced Campbell's.
You mean Campbell's soup? Oh my gosh, we're having revelations on the Married to Movies podcast today.
Okay. Anyways, it is starring Daniel Craig, Ava Green, Mads Mikkelsen.
Say that again.
Oh my gosh.
Eva Green.
Okay. So I know somebody who spells it EVA and she pronounces it Ava.
That's fair.
So that's why I pronounced it that way.
I just assumed it was
Ava. Whatever it is.
I'm just keeping the joke going.
Okay.
I'm just giving you a hard time.
From now on, if I mispronounce anything, just please just leave it. Okay. Starring Daniel Craig, Eva Green, Mads Mikkelsen, Judi Dench, Jeffrey Wright, and this one you can't correct me on because I'm not sure how it's pronounced. Giancarlo Giannini.
That's pretty close if it's not right.
Okay.
So I couldn't even correct you.
Okay. I know how the last name is spelled or pronounced because I'm a first grade teacher and one of my students' last names was Giannini last year.
Yes.
It was distributed by Sony Pictures. It has a runtime of 2 hours and 24 minutes. It's rated PG-13. It had a budget of $150 million and the box office total was $616 million.
I feel like I ask this every week because I'm looking at my notes when you say what the original budget was.
I will just repeat it again. Its budget was $150 million, box office total $616 million.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. So they did well.
Yes. So some fun facts. One of them is that 1 week after filming the movie, the 007 stage at Pinewood Studios burned down.
Oh, wow.
And this is actually the second time that's happened after
Really?
a 007 movie.
What was the other movie?
The first one was the 1985 movie A View to Kill.
Really? That's interesting. What if it was the original Casino Royale?
That'd be pretty crazy.
Wild because there is, it wasn't a movie, but it was like a TV special that was licensed by the Broccoli family to do a Casino Royale adaptation. So anyways.
Okay, my next fact is that Casino Royale is the first James Bond film that was approved by Chinese censors. All of the other movies were illegal in China up until this point.
Okay, interesting.
Then the location that they shot, the opening scene, when where they're in Madagascar on the construction site, that was in the Bahamas. And it was actually an abandoned hotel site at Coral Harbor, and it was under construction 30 years before this film. But it was used to film hotel rooms for a couple other James Bond movies. One of them was the 1965 Thunderball. The other was 1977 The Spy Who Loved Me. And now it is not used for filming at all. It's part of a military base.
Interesting.
Also, I have some casting details. So people who were considered to play James Bond. One was Henry Cavill. Sorry, I mispronounced that too.
Cavill.
Yeah, sorry. Did I say that right?
You were pretty close.
Okay. So anyways, I guess he, according to our conversation the other night, is being considered to play James Bond in like the next,
Yes.
what would that be called?
So Henry Cavill was one of the finalists for this movie.
Right.
But at the time, he would have been 22. Mm-hmm. So they decided that he was too young. So this go around, he's now in his 40s. Mm-hmm. And Daniel Craig has finished his run as Bond. So they're going into the next iteration of James Bond, the next era. And he is, again, being considered for the role. But it sounds like this time that they may be going younger, but maybe not. I've heard two conflicting stories, so.
Okay. So, so he was one of the main considerations. Hugh Jackman was also considered, but he had to turn it down because he was filming for X-Men.
Hugh Jackman did an interview regarding the role, and he said that he chose to turn it down because he wasn't sure if he wanted to do X-Men and James Bond, because he felt like it would be kind of a revolving door of franchise to franchise, mm-hmm. and just doing these big movies all the time and just going back and forth, kind of ping-ponging. So he ended up deciding to pass because he felt like the Pierce Brosnan movies were kind of too campy, too gadget heavy, and they really kind of needed to go back to like the grittier, kind of a realistic Bond. So that's why he passed on it. And he said when he went and saw Casino Royale in theaters for the first time, he was not happy with himself for passing on it because they did exactly what he thought they should do.
Yeah. So a few others, I didn't write down all of them because there were a ton, but some of the other considerations to play James Bond were Christian Bale, Orlando Bloom, Gerard Butler, Ewan McGregor, Sam Worthington, and Carl Urban. And also Daniel Craig initially had turned down the role because he felt that the franchise was too like stuck in its ways, I guess, like just stagnant.
Yeah.
So they still sent him the script, and after he had finished reading through it, he changed his mind. And then
that's interesting. I'm glad that he did, because I really, really like all of his Bond movies. Well, most of his Bond movies, but I really like him as James Bond. Some of those casting choices I think would have been pretty interesting.
Yeah, I do too.
I think Henry Cavill would have done a great job. He still would if he got cast, so I would have no problem with it. But I don't know. I think Hugh Jackman would have done a good job, but it would be hard for me to see him in that role. I think Ewan McGregor would have done pretty good. Love him as Obi-Wan. I don't know. I think they all probably would have been pretty strong choices.
Yeah, it always is very hard for me to picture anybody else in the role just after seeing the movies, but
yeah.
So the actor, I don't know that he has a name. I'm sure he does. But the guy that James is like chasing at the very beginning of the movie.
Yes.
Does he have a name?
Like his character's name?
Yeah.
He might have. It's probably in the credits somewhere, but I couldn't tell you.
Okay. Well, the actor that plays that man was actually one of the people who invented parkour, which I was like kind of mind blown about. But
yes,
he was able to add a lot to it, I'm sure, because of that.
Yes, for sure. Which is super cool. I mean, that was something like this would have been filmed back in 2006. So, almost, not quite, but almost 20 years ago, it was hot on the scene, and that was a really easy way to make Bond modern and kind of grounded, I guess, just because it's like something cool, something new, something different. That's not gadgets. Like you can go out and do it. Mm-hmm. But anyways.
My next one is that the Miami airport scenes were filmed at 3 different airports in 3 different countries. So they were filmed in England, the Bahamas, and Czech Republic. And then there was also like an Easter egg. I didn't catch it, but I want to rewatch just to see if I can hear it. In one of the airport scenes, you can hear an announcement for flight 007 or 007. I'm not sure how exactly they word it in the movie, but
really?
Yeah, I thought that was kind of fun.
Yeah, that is cool.
Then Daniel Craig got his 2 front teeth knocked out doing stunts during a fight scene for this movie, and they ended up having to fly his dentist in to replace them so they could continue shooting.
Really?
Yeah.
What did they say what fight scene it was?
I tried to look into it and I didn't see.
Interesting. Well, I mean, role dedication, I guess.
Yes. And my last fact is that the man who plays the card dealer, his name is Andreas Daniel. He got the role kind of by chance. The production company was looking for a card dealer, to play that role. And they called the casino he was working in at the time. And he was the one who happened to pick up the phone when they called.
Yeah.
And he's quoted as saying, "You're looking for a card dealer? You just found him. Take me." And so he got the part and flew to Prague to film his scenes and didn't tell anybody, just left.
Really?
And he bought himself a new car from his salary.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be pretty sick just to, hey, we need somebody with your particular skill set for this movie. Do you know anybody? Yes, I can do it.
Yeah.
And just leave
and just do it.
Do what you normally do for work, except, hey, we'll pay you an absurd amount of money to be in this film. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Well, that is all I've got. So we can move on to production details.
Okay. So I did kind of whittle mine down just to condense it and pick out some of my favorites, some of the relevant details, because there was a lot on this movie. A lot of it was on the pre-production side. I would assume mainly because this is the first entry into the Daniel Craig era. So there was a lot of pre-production details as far as choices being made in transition from Pierce Brosnan to Daniel Craig. A lot of design or stylistic changes, stuff like that. So I cut a lot of that stuff, but there is a lot of good, interesting information if you're interested in that type of stuff. It's all out there. But principal photography began on January 3rd, 2006 and ended on July 20th, 2006. Shooting locations include the Bahamas, Italy, Prague, and the United Kingdom. Production. So during production, the production crew hired a business called Spirit Yachts to build a sailboat for the film, which at the end of the film, you see James sailing on the Grand Canal in Venice towards the end of the film. Mm-hmm. That is the boat that they had constructed for this film. It's referred to, or they named it the Spirit after the company, Spirit Yachts. But in order to get the boat on the Grand Canal, they had to demast it, which, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the parts of a boat, a mast is the really big pole that supports the sails. Mm-hmm. That's your mast. So they had to demast the boat. They had to take the mast off in order to get the boat underneath bridges that were in the canal, because they had a specific location on the canal that they wanted to shoot the scene on. So in order to do that, they had to take the mast off, and it was the first time that a sailboat had sailed up the Grand Canal in 300 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So I kind of touched on this a moment ago, But early on in production, it was decided that the film would stick to practical effects as much as they possibly could. And that was very intentional because they wanted to distance the franchise from the previous Bond film, which was Die Another Day. At the time, it was the most recent Bond film prior to Casino Royale. And the majority, I don't know. I don't know if I'd say the majority, but a lot of the Pierce Brosnan movies, which I guess he only did 4, so let's just call it half. Half of his movies were received not just bad, like they were received really bad. He was received as a pretty good Bond, but they just got really kind of like, these are the most insane gadgets that can do anything you think of type stuff. And it just became like, yeah, this isn't really stinted in the book anymore and kind of stuff like that. So go ahead.
Speaking of Die Another Day, apparently, according to the research that I did, people referred to that movie like kind of jokingly as Buy Another Day because there was so like an excessive amount of product placement in that movie. Yeah.
So the Broccoli family, who, if you don't know, they own the rights to the James Bond films, and there is an insane history about all that, which we couldn't possibly cover on this podcast, but I believe there is a documentary on Amazon about it. I'm sure there's probably stuff all over YouTube, but if you're interested in that, go check that out. But basically, there's this family, the Broccoli family. They own the rights to James Bond films, so they make all the big decisions. So anyways, they felt at the time that the Bond franchise had become too fantastical, and so they really wanted to keep it grounded with practical effects, and that coupled with the director's decision that he felt strongly that they needed to shoot as much practically as they could. So I went ahead and picked a couple of my favorite practical scenes from the film that had some interesting details in there. So towards the end of the film, I kind of like middle to end of the film, when, spoiler alert, James is driving his Aston Martin on the road looking for Vesper, and then he comes up very quickly on her. She's tied up and laying in the road. He crashes his Aston Martin, and it's like a horrific crash. They did that for real, and this was performed by stunt driver Adam Kearley. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. In order to pull the stunt off, they constructed a small 18-inch ramp, which was placed on the road, and Adam had to hit that, which he did, going over 70 miles per hour, which launched him in the air. While he was in the air, he had to simultaneously trigger an air cannon that he had controls to, which was mounted behind the driver's seat at the precise moment of impact. So, once the car is hitting the ground, so that he could press that air cannon and a huge gust of air would be blasted out, causing the car to spin and even more. So he achieved all of this, and it resulted in 7 rotations, which also resulted in a new world record for the most rotations in a car crash by the Guinness Book of World Records.
I did see that. It's pretty impressive.
Yes. And like knowing all this now, when I watch that scene, it makes perfect sense because I've always thought that scene just looks like really visceral, like really, it's a really intense crash. It's pretty hardcore. So knowing that they had this air cannon and all that stuff, it makes perfect sense. And then the final detail that I have, as well as the final stunt / practical effect, is that towards the end of the film, kind of the big set piece is this floating house that's under construction on the canal, and it all goes underwater. Well, they constructed a full rig of a floating canal house, and it weighed over 90 tons. It was filled with electronics and hydraulics that could be controlled by a computer, and the rig could be, once you control it with the hydraulics as well as a multitude of air compressors, it could be submerged up to 19 feet underwater.
Wow.
Yeah. So the majority of the shots at the end of the movie were all done for real. They had that set piece where the actors were in there and the whole thing was moving, and talking about that, thinking through that, hearing it is kind of mind-boggling.
It is.
I can't imagine being inside like a fun house like that, where it's like essentially the floor is lava, where it's like your floor is just disappearing. The water keeps rising, and you're also having to act like that's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But anywho, that's all the details that I have.
Okay.
So would you like me to go first or would you like to go first?
I can go first.
All right. Scale of 1 to 100. How would you rate this movie?
I think I'm going to give it a solid 94.
Okay. Good score. I think I'm right in the same boat with you. I've gone back and forth on my scoring, which I feel like I've said several times over the last few episodes we've done. But I really like that score, and that's what I'm going to give it. I'm going to give it a 94 as well.
Okay.
So, what were some of your favorite scenes, or what were some of the things you disliked about this film? Either or.
I don't feel like there was a lot that I disliked. I would say my favorite scenes would be like one of them is when James is driving that, like in the opening sequence. I had to ask you what it's called because I didn't want to sound silly. But did you say it's called a front loader that he's driving?
Yeah,
at the
it's
beginning?
a front end loader.
Front end loader. So I really liked that scene, just like, like when the guy that he's chasing like is clearly anticipating him like to run up somewhere.
Right.
And then you just see James like in a full like,
Right.
front end loader, like you said. And then like the guy's like shooting at him and like James like doesn't even flinch. Like it's just like,
Right.
So I don't know. And that whole opening scene is pretty cool with all of like the whole chase and everything. It's just very intense. And
Yes.
I really like action movies and stuff. So I enjoyed that.
Yes, I agree. I think the opening sequence is done really well. I think there's probably a lot of like symbolism or whatever in there as far as the contrast between who James is pursuing and James himself. Like there's that scene in particular where he kind of goes over the wall and then James just busts through the wall with the front end loader. Mm-hmm. And then there's another one where they're like on the construction site. The guy like runs up and jumps over a hole in the drywall where like a vent would be. And James just runs right through the drywall.
Yeah, I like that one too.
I think that's just trying to show the stark contrast between them. Like this guy is kind of like a swift smuggler or thief or, whatever you want to call it. And James is just a no-nonsense, like I'm going to find you no matter the cost and I'm going to get you no matter how many walls I have to break down or, whatever. He's just really hardcore. Headstrong probably is another way to describe him. But
if I had to guess, I'd probably say that somewhere in these opening scenes is probably where his front teeth got knocked out. But I mean,
yeah,
maybe not.
Maybe not. Never know.
I also really, it's supposed to be this way. Like, it's just like, you fall in love with Vesper and James's love, and then it's just like your heart is ripped out from your chest at the end.
It really is, honestly. And I think I said it while we were watching it last night, but it breaks my heart every time I watch this movie when she betrays him, especially because you later find out that she really didn't want to. It was just kind of this thing where it was like she was in too deep by the time James and her met initially on the train for the very first time.
Right.
She was already in way too deep. And maybe it could have panned out differently if she would have come clean at that moment. But that's not how it happened. And so I do believe that her and James's love was real. And it is just a crushing blow because I think, you get this whole idea that like, oh, James is done. He's retiring. He's happy. He's content. And he had this crazy adventure with Lashif, and it had all these twists and turns. And then out of nowhere, he's done. He got saved, and now he can just rest. And he's got this girl who's crazy about him. He's crazy about her. And he has like 150 million from this high stakes poker game. Like life is good. But then you figure out that something is off, because it wouldn't be a James Bond movie if that was what happened. But I really, until the very sequence where like she is like leaving to go to the market, quote unquote, you never really think, at least not the first time you watch it, that she's gonna betray him. Right.
The only thing that could maybe tip you off is when they're in the boat and she's taking pictures and she sees that guy with the glasses, that like one sunglass,
it's like an
sunglasses
eye patch
frame or whatever. Yeah. But even that, like the way that she looks at him, it's almost like she looks confused, not like,
or even scared, just that like maybe she thinks he's a threat to them and their life that they have now.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily connotate that like he's after her and not James or, anything like that. But yeah, it is very, the ending is very heartbreaking.
So all that to say, I do really love all of the scenes like where they're together, whether it's at the casino or at like, I just really enjoy watching their love and things.
I agree. I think that Vesper and James, or Ava, whichever it is, and Daniel Craig have really good chemistry on camera. I think their parts are written really, really well. I think they're acted really, really well. It's a very believable performance, and I like the dynamic, especially in the film after James has to kill those two guys who attack Lashif in his room. And Vesper is there with him, and she ultimately kind of saves James's life by grabbing the gun out of the one guy's hand. And then after that whole thing is done, James he tells her, he's like, I'm going to hide the bodies. You go back into the room and you stay there. And he goes in and he finds her, she's still in her dress and everything. But she's just sitting in the shower, fully clothed and just crying. And he walks in and just sits down next to her in his bloody suit and just holds her. Like that scene specifically, because she's like, I feel like I have blood on my hands and I can't get it off. Referring to the fact that like she feels guilty for the death of those men, even though it was required in order for them to survive in that moment and all that stuff. That scene specifically is a really, I don't know if touching is the right word, but maybe heartfelt. Like it's just it's a really real moment for those two characters.
Right.
And I think that's what makes it hurt so much at the end, is just that James was uncharacteristically caring for her.
Yeah.
Which there are hints of that earlier in the film. When they first meet, he's like, "You're not my type." And she's like, "Why?" She has some comment.
She said, smart.
And he said, no, single. Because, he says earlier in the film that he likes to be with married women because it keeps things simple, meaning that there are no strings attached. He can move on and they can have their own life type thing. But so he doesn't have to get involved. So anyways, what else?
The only other one that I can think of right now is one that's like, I don't know if it's like this for other people, but I feel like this is probably one of the most memorable scenes of the movie, when James is poisoned and his first, he's very quick on his feet, even though he's literally dying, like grabbing the salt and going to the bathroom and trying to make himself get sick.
Right.
And then obviously that doesn't work. And so he's like going out to his car and like hooking up the AED to himself and talking on the phone with, well, not the phone, I guess, but talking with
he sends
MI6
the blood sample to them and all that stuff. And
yeah. Like that, I think, is a very standout scene. It's, I mean, like everything about it is so well done. Like especially the camera work, like it like makes you feel almost what he's feeling. Like it, like, it's like the camera is, I don't know if there's a term for it. I'm sure there is, but like it's like shaky
cam.
Is that literally what it's called? Shaky cam.
It is. It's the industry term for it. It's called shaky cam.
Yeah. So like, I just think that it was very well done, and it's just a very notable scene. And then obviously, he ends up like flatlining because his AED wasn't hooked up correctly, and then Vesper comes out and hooks it up and presses the button and saves him and everything. And I love when he's poisoned, he's playing cards at the table and ends up like saying "deal me out" when he realizes that he's been poisoned.
Right.
And I just love the exchange when he comes back, and Lashif obviously is shocked that he's alive and well, and James says, "I'm sorry, that last hand, it nearly killed me," or something like that. I love that.
I do too. I think that Mads Mikkelsen, Lashif, and Daniel Craig's James Bond have just a really great dynamic. I think they play really, really well off of each other. And on that note, I love Mads Mikkelsen. Pretty much in every role I've seen him in, he's just a phenomenal actor. He does a really, really good job of playing Lashif and being able to tell a story just with little emotes, like facial expressions here and there. Just especially in that scene, like he has this really, really, really subtle but obvious look of kind of shock, while trying not to act like it's this big thing, because they're sitting at this poker table with all these other witnesses and stuff like that. But I love their dynamic as the hero and the villain. I think it's really, really well done. But yeah, I love that scene too.
Did you know that Mads Mikkelsen used to be a gymnast?
Did he really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Sorry, random, but
yeah.
I think those are like my top favorite scenes if I had to choose just a few.
Okay. Some of the things that I really like about this movie, or one of the things that stands out to me when I think about it as a whole, is the movie's storytelling ability. And what I mean by that, and if you're at all a fan of the show, listen to other episodes, I'm sure you've probably heard me say, show, don't tell. One of the worst things that a movie can do is to just dump dialogue on top of you that you have to pick up in order to understand the rest of the movie. In certain scenarios, it's necessary. Don't get me wrong. That's not what I'm getting at. But if you can do it in a way that engages your audience, gets them to pay attention, and they watch the scene, attentively, then it's going to sink in deeper and quicker, as opposed to just getting a dialogue dumped onto them. So I actually looked when we were watching the movie last night. Almost the first 20 minutes of the film are pure action sequences.
I believe it.
With no dialogue. There's some here and there in the first few minutes, but the majority of it is a 15 to 20 minute parkour sequence. And I just have a big appreciation for that throughout the whole film, because many scenes aren't maybe that long, but there are a lot of sequences where we're just watching it unfold. We're seeing these things happen, as opposed to being told, oh yeah, he tortured me for 5 hours or whatever.
Right.
No, you see Lashif cut the bottom out of a chair, put James on it, and beat him with a rope. It's really gruesome, but it hits harder than being told that it happened to him. And so I do appreciate that throughout the whole movie, that they do that a lot, and they do it really well in this film. They execute on that note. But some of the other things that stick out to me, I really, really do like the sequence where they're playing poker. I mean, maybe not sequence, but scenes. I think there's a lot of tension, a lot of drama. You can feel the stakes in those scenarios. And again, there's very little dialogue, but there's also not a lot happening. Like in terms of, like, it's not this huge action sequence, but it is like some monumental, really important parts of the movie that are going on that are just being played out in silence.
Right.
You know, it's just seeing Lashif, like, I guess he's kind of like shuffling the poker chip with his thumb. I don't. He's doing a little trick with his poker chips. Just seeing him do that, as you can tell, he's thinking about if he should up the bid or not. Like stuff like that. It just the setting in general. Like a high stakes poker game is a really cool setting for a film, and to be able to watch that all unfold as the characters are experiencing it at the same time as we are and feeling the same things as we are, it's a really cool dynamic, and I enjoy that quite a bit.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, this is a smaller role of his, but another movie where Jeffrey Wright has just a great, he's a great actor, character playing.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things I appreciate about the Daniel Craig Bond movies as a whole, not exclusive to this movie, but it is where it started, is the inclusion of Jeffrey Wright's character. Phoenix, or what is his name? Felix.
I don't remember.
I don't remember his last name, but I know it's Felix. Who is just like, he never plays like maybe a huge role per se, but he's always interesting when he's on screen.
Yes.
So he does show up in this one, Casino Royale, as well as I'm pretty sure he's in Quantum of Solace. I don't believe he's in Skyfall, and I don't think he's in Spectre either, but I know he's in No Time to Die. So he's in at least 3 of the 5 Daniel Craig movies. But I like that, again, just like you said, Jeffrey Wright plays the role extremely well with a very minimal impact on the story. He does a great job, and that's what Jeffrey Wright does in all of his roles. I think he's a great actor. I love him as Commissioner Gordon in the Batman. In the Hunger Games, I forget his character's name, but I like him quite a bit in that too.
I looked it up. He is in Casino Royale, obviously, Quantum of Solace, and No Time to Die.
Okay, so I was right. He was in those 3. I wasn't for sure on the other 2, but anywho, yeah, I just really enjoy him. So yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. Some of the other things I like or maybe dislike. I really, really dislike the twist at the end of this movie, but I also like it.
I have a love-hate relationship with it.
Yes, and I know we touched on it a little bit already, so I won't, talk on it a whole lot, but just, it really does rip your heart out. And I think that, maybe something that is along these lines that I can expand upon as far as a dislike goes, is that by the time we get to the point where James is like resigning from MI6 and he's just going to go have his life with Vesper. It does feel a little bit like the movie has already ended, like maybe 2 times. And so for it to keep going, I obviously welcome it, because more story in this universe is interesting.
Right.
But at the same time, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a pacing issue per se, because as a whole, I like the movie and I think it's really good. But I do feel like the movie could have been buttoned up after James was saved by Mr. White when Lashif was torturing him. To have the inclusion of the twist ending is very interesting. However, it's like you go from this really high moment to then this really like not boring, but kind of slow. I don't know if slow is even the right word, but just this, it's a really high point to a really low point in terms of action and stakes and everything else. It's really calm. That's maybe a good word.
Well, it's supposed to, make it, I feel like it's supposed to feel like, oh, it's over. Like, everything's done.
Right.
And then, it just like pulls you right back in a little bit later.
Right. And I'm sure that's totally intentional. And that's, I'm sure if the filmmakers were listening, they'd probably be happy and they're like, oh yeah, that's what you should be feeling. However, it never fails when I watch this movie. I've seen it now about 5 times, that would be my guess. 4 or 5. It never fails that when I get to this point, I always am like, oh wow, we still have like 45 minutes left. And not necessarily that that's a bad thing, but just the fact that I am like, oh wow, we have this much time left. I feel like we've had a lot of movie already, which maybe is a compliment in a way, because it's telling the filmmakers that, hey, the X amount of minutes up to that point in the movie was so well done that I feel like I got this huge successful story. So this is all just bonus. So maybe that's a more positive way for me to look at it, I guess.
Yeah.
That would really probably be the only critique that I have for the film, is just that I feel like there may be 2 times that it could have been buttoned up and it wasn't, but that was probably intentional. But outside of that, I think we've hit on a lot of the notes that I probably would have talked about on my own, just as far as parts that I really liked. I do think the whole sequence in the airport, like from beginning to end, that's really good. It's very intense, well done. I will say I am a little surprised, not necessarily a bad thing, but I feel like Judi Dench's role is kind of small in the movie.
It is. It's not nearly as, she doesn't appear on screen nearly as much as in the
Skyfall.
In like Skyfall, other of Daniel Craig's movies. But I kind of thought the same thing.
It's just kind of scenes here and there, and
which I'm not necessarily mad about. Like
yes,
I don't have any complaints about that, I guess.
I agree. I don't necessarily either. It's just kind of an observation. And I will say on that note that I love Judi Dench's M. She's actually the M that I grew up with, which for some listeners out there is probably, very strange, because M was first played by a woman in the Pierce Brosnan movies, which was very recent. So he became James Bond in the 90s. So, and Bond has been around as far as filmmaking goes for many, many decades. I think the first one came out in the 60s, 70s.
You're probably
maybe.
right. I'm not sure.
So, anywho, M as a character has been traditionally played played by a man for decades and decades. But for me, my very first introduction to Bond was through Pierce Brosnan, and my favorite iteration was actually in the video game rather than a movie, Everything or Nothing, which was an exclusive PlayStation 2 game. It went platinum because it had an original story, and it was phenomenal. Willem Dafoe was the Bond villain. Pierce Brosnan reprised his role in the game.
I love Willem Dafoe.
I love Willem Dafoe too. But it was amazing. I'm getting a little off topic, but if you've never played that game, go play it. It's fantastic.
Sorry to cut you off, but to answer your question, I looked it up. The first James Bond movie came out in 1962.
Okay, so I was right. It was in the 60s. So, we're talking at this point 60 years of Bond on screen. That's a long time. And Judi Dench has only, or I guess a woman has only been M for about 20 years, give or take, because the last 2 Daniel Craig movies were M was played by a man. So, anywho, I like Judi Dench as M, I guess is what all of that was to say.
Yes, I do too.
But I think that's all I have for this episode.
I think I'm with you.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys for joining us again. We had a lot of fun covering this episode. I love the Daniel Craig movies.
I do too.
I honestly, looking back, I almost wish we would have just dedicated 5 weeks to covering every single one in order.
Well, let's just do one in each season.
Yeah.
We did one last season.
It's not a bad idea. When I watch one of them, I want to watch all of them.
Yeah,
because they're all very good and I enjoy them quite a bit. But anywho, it was a lot of fun for us doing this. We hope you guys enjoyed listening to it. Next week, we are excited to be covering Saving Private Ryan, our first kind of war film. One of my favorite films. It's really, really well done. If you want to watch it ahead of time, it is currently streaming on Netflix as well as Paramount Plus. Anything else you want to add?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys for joining us. If you liked what you heard, leave us a comment, give us a thumbs up, leave a 5-star rating on Spotify. And just thank you guys so much for your support. We are past the halfway point of season 2, which is really hard to believe. It's gone by really, really quick. But we have continued to see our audience grow. So thank you guys if you've been spreading the word or just engaging with us on social media. We definitely do appreciate that. And we hope you guys have a great week.
See you next time.
Bye.